Team Deth goes to the movies, and this time I was flying solo. I went to go see Scream 6 on my own at the local AMC. And, I know that me personally, I'm not really associated with a lot of modern horror movies. I do Monster Kid Radio. I do classic monster movies. That's my jam. That's what I do. Most of my horror movies are in black and white, rubber-suited monsters, that sort of thing. But, I still like modern horror movies too. And, I wanted to go see the Scream movie. I've always seen the Scream movies in the theater. In fact, I saw Scream, the first one, opening night. And I kind of regret how I behaved after the movie because my friends and I were all talking about the movie on the way out, and spoilers for a movie that's over 25 years old now. Is it over 25 years old? Oof. Spoiler for an older movie. I was talking quite loudly about how I didn't expect there to be 2 killers in the lobby that was full of other people waiting to go see Scream for the very first time. So if I ruined the movie for you way back then, I am oh so sorry. At this point, though, it's kind of the formula. There's always more than one killer unless it's Scream 3, and then, well, it's a convoluted kind of thing. And really, the Scream movies to me, especially the first one, very cool, very groundbreaking. It really explored the meta-narrative and was kind of deconstructing horror movies, and that was something that would get played with throughout the rest of the franchise, sometimes to mixed results. And really, the last 2 movies, Scream 5 and, well, the most recent one, Scream 6, really drew blood when it came to analyzing and breaking down and deconstructing what horror movies are now, slasher movies in particular. And I found that really interesting, and one of the reasons why I was really excited about seeing Scream 6. Also, the thing about the Scream movies that I really appreciated, especially the first 2 and kind of the third and fourth one, Wes Craven is one of my favorite contemporary horror directors, although he's no longer with us, so I don't know if it's fair to say he's a contemporary anymore. But Wes Craven's work, especially his earlier work, I've found very affecting and effective, and I really thought that what he did with the Scream movies was fascinating. Scream 3 is kind of like the black sheep of the franchise, I feel like, partly because Kevin Williamson wasn't nearly as involved in that film as he was in the previous 2 and then the fourth one. And he had mixed results. I guess your mileage may vary. It took the franchise out of the small town environment. Yeah, I know Scream 2 played on the college campus, but it took the film franchise to LA, to California, and I kind of saw some reflections of that in Scream 6, because as we know when we watch the trailer, Scream 6 is set in New York City, which, I have to chuckle about, because when you talk about slasher films going to the Big Apple, what's the first thing you think of? Well, if you're somebody like me, who grew up on the Friday the 13th movies, grew up in air quotes, on the Friday the 13th movies, Jason Takes Manhattan, Friday the 13th Part 8. In fact, that's even referenced in this movie. At one point, a character is seen watching a scene from Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, which is not the best of the franchise. It's part of the reason why it was the last one that Paramount had anything to do with before another studio took over the Friday the 13th franchise. So I thought it was a brave choice by the filmmakers to reference Friday the 13th Part 8 in this film. It makes sense, though, since Scream 6 does go to the Big Apple, it does go to New York. Although, to be completely honest with you, for all of its New York-ness that it supposedly had, I don't know. I mean, it felt like it was in a big city, but outside of a really cool sequence on a subway and a scene in a bodega, it didn't really feel like they were in the Big Apple, so to speak. It didn't feel like they were in a huge, big city. And I don't know if it was because it wasn't shot in New York, it was shot somewhere in Canada, I believe. I don't know, it just seemed to be missing some of that New Yorkness that you see when you watch a movie that's set in New York, that was shot in New York, or a TV show that is set in New York, that was shot in New York, or in a big city. Scream 3 felt like it was shot and took place in LA, in Tinseltown, in Hollywood. Scream 6 felt like it took place in a bigger city, but nothing New York-y, Here's the other thing that I like about the Scream movies. This is what keeps me coming back to the Scream movies. The murder mystery element. I've learned over the years that I actually really enjoy a good murder mystery. My fiance has introduced me Hercule Poirot and some really cool murder mystery stuff there. And I'm just really excited about learning more about that particular subgenre, which is something that I haven't really explored proper unless it's wrapped up in a horror movie or a slasher film. And the Scream movies started real strong with that murder mystery element. As the franchise continues, you kind of lose a little bit of that. And in Scream 5 and Scream 6, I feel like they really brought it back. Unfortunately, in Scream 6, and this is where I'm going to give you a spoiler warning, spoiler in 3, 2, stabby stabby 1, the mystery isn't that mysterious. It's not that I figured it out early or anything like that, but once the killers are revealed, it just kind of felt like, oh, okay. It wasn't anything kind of mind-blowing. It didn't feel like a twist. It didn't feel like a huge reveal. It just felt like, oh, okay. Also, here's the other thing that I really struggled with Scream 6. Scream 5, I really liked. I loved the themes. I loved the messaging. I love the idea that fans sometimes feel like they can take ownership of a film or a film franchise or a media franchise, and really, it's not their franchise. They're the consumers. That's their relationship with the product. They aren't the owner or the keeper of that franchise. And I thought some of the stuff that Scream 5 was doing, talking about that, was really neat. And I was really excited to see what Scream 6 was going to do, especially since the creative team behind Scream 6 was the same from Scream 5. And it was going to be a continuation of those characters from Scream 5. Son is Neve Campbell, and we'll talk about that in a moment. I was looking forward to seeing where they were going to take things with this. And there is a moment, there is the Randy moment. Randy being the video geek character from the previous first 2 films, and I guess third film with the videotape appearance anyway. There's the Randy moment where a descendant of Randy does these are the rules of the film franchise monologue, and I thought that was interesting. A lot of things were talked about with it being a franchise now. It's not a prequel or sequel or requel, which is a term I kind of hate. But it's a film franchise now, and they have different rules, and the legacy characters aren't safe. Except, and I gave you the spoiler warning, all the returning characters from the previous film that appear in this film are safe. The only people who really die in Scream 6 are characters that are introduced in Scream 6. So we don't have that follow-through from the monologue that we were given about how legacy characters aren't safe. You were setting that up for us. You could have given us that moment, and it just didn't happen, and it just felt like a missed opportunity. All the legacy characters, the ridiculously named Core 4 from Woodsboro, survive. They make it to the end of the movie. Maybe there's some question about whether or not somebody is going to survive, but then a line of dialogue is mentioned at one point about how somebody made it to the hospital and she's going to be okay. So again, the legacy characters get off, I'm not going to say scot-free or scream-free. Yeah, they took some damage, and one character even jokes about how they're going to need years of therapy after this, which is also a recurring theme and something that I think is really interesting about this particular wave or part or phase or cycle of the Scream franchise, is exploring the psychological trauma that comes from having encountered Ghostface, or really any slasher movie, which is something that I've always thought was interesting. Well, I want to know what the story is behind the slasher movie characters who survive. What happens after they kill the bad guy and they get away? I want to know what that story is. And I know there have been some books and even some films that explore that, but I want to see that in a big budget mainstream horror movie way. And this movie does play with that a little bit. But again, that's not what this movie's about. This movie's about Ghostface. It's about Scream taking place in New York. It's about the survivors of the most recent Woodsboro tragedy surviving and what happens to them next. It was fun. It was a little long. The movie does run a little over 2 hours long, just a minute or two longer than 2 minutes. And I sat around and waited because the word online, and I didn't spoil it for myself, but the word online was that there was an end credit sequence. And that end credit sequence was making fun of end credit sequences in about 15 seconds. And that's it. I don't know if it was worth sitting around, but again, you've been warned. I gave you the spoiler warning. Okay, let's talk about the presence, or lack thereof, of Sidney Prescott, or Neve Campbell. So, she opted not to return to do this film. over financial reasons, and rightly so. She had been part of the franchise from the beginning, and I'd venture to say that the Scream franchise would not be where it was if not for the trilogy, the trio, the triad of Courtney Cox, of David Arquette, and of Neve Campbell. Without the three of them, the series would not have lasted. Now, in Scream 5, we lost David Arquette's character, and Courtney Cox's character, she appears in this one, but no Neve Campbell. Now, they don't say she was killed off screen. They don't kill her off. They just say that she got out of town and went to go find safety because she deserved her happy ending, and that is that, and that was great. Awesome. Means she might come back later, which does feel like something the Scream franchise can do at this point, because we had the return of Kirby in this film. And Kirby is a character we hadn't seen since Scream 4. She just kind of disappeared after that. Not mentioned much at all in Scream 5. I think she was mentioned in dialogue, and that was about it. But to have Kirby come back, and I'm purposely not mentioning the actress's name because I will probably mispronounce her last name, so Hayden P. Does return. I suddenly felt very old when she is introduced as an FBI agent, and Gale Weathers, Courtney Cox's character, refers to her as a child, as a baby, and it's like, oh man, I remember when I was watching her on Heroes, man. I'm old. But then so is the Scream franchise, I suppose, which it's been really interesting. Again, this is something that I find fascinating about the franchise altogether, is the way the franchise has evolved with time, as it's gotten away from using those clunky wireless phones to cell phones and using smartphones. I find that really interesting. I find the technology not being ignored, but actually being used to enhance the storytelling, to enhance some of the chase scenes and that sort of thing. There's a really cool sequence when Ghostface shows up at Gale Weathers' place, and he's stalking her in her home, and they're talking on a smartphone the entire time. And it's just really neat and very cool to see that the filmmakers and the creative team behind Scream really are paying attention to what technology he can do, and not coming up with reasons why cell phones don't work. I mean, it's an integral part of the franchise. There's a lot of things in this franchise that could potentially not have aged well, but I feel like that the filmmakers, the people that are running the show right now at the Scream factory, that's not what I meant, but the people that are producing Scream are really aware and cognizant of where Scream came from, the technology that was involved, the culture that was involved, that sort of thing, and still being reverent of that while advancing the story. We still have talk of the video stores and the horror movies of the 80s. There is a cute little moment between two characters from different eras of the Scream franchise discussing the best Nightmare on Elm Street or the best Friday the 13th film, and that was nice to see. I don't know if I necessarily believe that a 20-something horror fan today would care all that much about Psycho 2. I don't know if I believe, and maybe that's just old Generation X me feeling a little jaded, feeling like we don't have that video store to go and have those conversations about what the best Friday the 13th sequel was, that sort of thing. Scream 6 does break some new ground. The opening sequence, very different than anything we've seen in a Scream film. Very different from anything we've ever seen. And I didn't know what I was in for when that Scream opening title card hit the screen. After what we had seen, I had no idea where we were going with this. It was probably the best twist of the whole film, to be completely honest. If I was looking for a twist, that was it. I really appreciated that we had a killer reveal followed by another killer reveal in which the killer killed the previous killer. Again, I did give you a spoiler warning, so please don't at me at the comments, but down below, maybe do like and subscribe so that the next time Team Deth goes to the movies, you'll get notified, or you'll get notified about any other videos that turn up here on the Team Deth YouTube channel. In the end, I am so glad I went to go see Scream 6, and I'm glad I did it tonight, opening weekend, because I know a lot of reviews are going to come out. I know a lot of people are going to be talking about it online, and it's going to be really hard to avoid spoilers. But I'm glad I got a chance to see it. As somebody who was there from the very, very beginning, I won't say that I felt obligated, but I felt appreciated by the Scream franchise for sticking it out. I'm glad I saw it. There was a really cool set piece with an abandoned movie theater, which, again, just love that as a location. And basically a shrine or a museum to all the previous Scream films. In the Scream franchise, the world of Scream, there is the Stab movie franchise, which is inspired by the Scream story killings, and then you've got the Gale Weathers books as well in there. So there's a lot of different layers and layers of meta storytelling you can play with there. And I really felt like this one paid homage to the previous films by giving us a set piece or a scene in which there's a character who had built a shrine basically to all things Scream. And I thought that was really neat, and I appreciated that. I would have loved to have spent more time in there, just kind of looking at all the different items. They're basically props from the previous films, up to and including Randy's video store work shirt, which I thought was cool to see as well. And hey, we even got a little bit of a nod to fan filmmakers, fan productions inspired by Scream. And I thought that was kind of cool. And as a podcaster, as an online content creator, it was cool to see posters on a character's wall from horror movie podcasts that I know and recognize. I thought that was kind of cool too. One of these days, I would love for something like that to actually get mentioned in dialogue and not just be set dressing, have somebody reference a horror movie podcast or something along those lines. I'd love to see that. And I know we got a little bit of that in Scream 5, I suppose, but I'd like to see more of that because I feel like podcasting is such a mainstream thing now. It'd be cool to see some of us genre podcasters and content creators get a little bit of a rub on the big screen, a little bit more than we have so far. Do I recommend seeing it in 3D? I don't know. Despite my shirt, I didn't see it in 3D. I know it's playing in 3D right now. I don't know if it needed to be in 3D. There was one scene involving an apartment complex or two apartment buildings next to each other with several floors up, and a ladder was stretched from one window to the other, and characters were walking across the ladder to get away from the killer. There were some interesting camera shots in there kind of looking down on everything that would have made it, I suppose, interesting to see in 3D, but I don't know if the movie itself needed to be in 3D altogether. Yeah, it just wasn't something that I think was needed. It would not have enhanced my experience. Well, it would have enhanced my experience if the group of girls behind me would have shut up before I had to turn around and ask them to can it as the movie started, Maybe I'm jaded. Maybe I just don't have much of patience for you young whippersnappers. But if you're talking in a movie, if you're laughing in a horror movie during a brutal death scene, I'm going to turn around and tell you to shut your trap. So, go see Scream 6. Yeah, do see it if you're interested in these movies. If you are a fan of the franchise, don't miss it. I think it's really cool that, again, they really honored all the previous films while building up this meta-narrative about the franchise and heroes. If they stick around long enough, they eventually become the villains. And I thought that was an interesting point to make, considering a lot of the issues that we've seen come up with negative reactions to these film franchise and media franchises that have been coming up, like think of Star Wars off the top of my head. I thought that was really interesting as well to have that kind of referenced in the film. So yeah, again, I'd recommend it. And honestly, when it hits home media, whether that's streaming or something like that, okay, let's be fair, once it hits streaming, I'd be interested in maybe watching 5 and 6 back to back, since they are by the same filmmakers, they do follow the same group of characters, and I wonder if I'd be able to glean anything else from that to kind of scratch that need for meta storytelling that I got so loud and clear in the very first Scream film, and even in a previous film of Wes Craven's before he took on Scream, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which is my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street film. Again, it deals with the story of storytelling, and that just really appeals to me. Again, please like and subscribe, and the next time we go to the movies, with or without my fiance, we'll let you know. And until then, what's your favorite scary movie? I have no cool way to end this. I'm just gonna cut it at that. Yeah.